his latest book, he applies that the Greco-Roman bio theory to quite a few different passages, and it's, of course, David Farnell on defending inerrancy offers about a 40-page refutation of that, but it's amazing because he'll use words like a particular gospel author was confused some of the details, or John just chose to take one of the cleansing of the temple, take the cleansing of the temple account, and just chose to put it at the beginning for his own purposes. And so it's amazing how much he admits in this later work. And he told me that he thought I would have a better, I would see where he's coming from wasn't so bad. And I read this other thing, and he's starting to clarify where his views go. It's not a pretty place.
Which reminds me that all the way back in point 1, where we talk about the primacy of Mark there. Why do the genre critics believe Mark wrote first? The whole history of Christianity, you had Matthew writing first, practically. Why suddenly the change to Mark? What changed it? Have you heard of Karl Marx? Have you heard of Darwin? That's what changed it all, this evolutionary view. You have to have Mark first because Mark is simpler.
Right.
And you go from the simple to the complex. And so you have to put Mark first to follow. Your philosophy demands that you do Mark first. It's not that any really exegetical or comparative study demands it. You got to tell me that some of the brightest minds in the history of Christianity for 1900 years were all wrong, and then didn't see the point, including Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, and others. I don't buy it. These people were bright people. And by the way, I think unstudied part of this would be to study the comparison between the earliest harmony of the gospel, Tatian's Diatessaron. I think Tatian's Diatessaron has not been emphasized enough or studied enough. 3/4 of all of the Gospels are mentioned in Tatian's Diatessaron. 3/4, so that's a lot of it, and that alone would give you the ammunition to show the historicity of the Gospels.
So the Chicago Statement on Biblical Inerrancy seems to be open to the idea that other genres exterior to the Bible could perhaps shed a little light on the Scripture. Can you think of any off the top of your head where that really has been helpful and really helping to understand anything in the New Testament?
Where genre criticism has been helpful, not anywhere it's been necessary. You can explain them as David Farnell does, and I just urge you to read that article. It's a potent article by a man with a PhD in New Testament studies from Dallas Seminary, under some of the very people, Bach and others, who are buying into this genre criticism. So he's not well liked by...
Well, I do have an example. I just did a paper on Paul's disputed letters, and one example in there is 2 Timothy. Again, the people who follow genre criticism say 2 Timothy is an example of the Greco-Roman Testamentum, which in the Greco-Roman tradition was something that was composed after the death of a person, just trying to lay out things for the follow-on generations. Well, the counter to that is also appealing to genre, saying, oh, we have examples of the same kind of thing happening in the first century. It's called Mandata Principis, which is a letter from an absent leader giving their delegates instructions. Here's Paul in prison in Rome giving instructions to his absent delegate Timothy. He says, hey, I think the time is short. By the way, pay attention to these details. So we have cases where you can use genre criticism against genre criticism because it exists.
What?
Can you speak to the idea of using apocalyptic genre? You know, it's a different area of the New Testament, but in the book of Revelation, do you think that this is the same problem?
Focus the question a little bit. Do I think it's the same problem?
In other words, I hear a lot about people trying to interpret Revelation based upon it being apocalyptic genre. Do you think they're running the same problem that you would try, that they would?
Absolutely. You know, the book of Revelation says it's a book of symbols right in the beginning. It tells us what it is. Secondly, it interprets the symbols, you know. And when it doesn't interpret the symbols, other passages in the Bible do interpret the symbols. So we got all the symbols interpreted. The angels, you know, that's interpreted, the messages from the church and so forth. So I think beneath the surface, the historical grammatical interpretation of Revelation, which is anti-genre criticism, you got to throw out the historical grammatical method of interpreting to accept it, is maintainable in the book of Revelation from what it itself says. It's a literal account of what is going to happen in the future. The only difference being it refers to the future rather than the past. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I really like what you've done here. I think you nail it. And one of the things I really like when you quote Farnell is he's showing simple ways to harmonize things, and yet the move seems to be we don't want to harmonize anything.
Yeah.
And
It's a bad word.
Yeah.
Harmony is a bad word. Oh, that's just a harmonization, you know. You're just harmonize. Well, what's wrong with finding how things are consistent?
Amen.
What's wrong with the law of non-contradiction? I mean, it gets me why people are against harmony, and of course, they're against harmony because they don't want you to be able to do it. They want to say you have to do it by genre criticism, not by the laws of logic and other natural means.
Now, the same thing's happening in the literature regarding Paul's letters. You have two divides here. One of them says these 6 letters, Ephesians, Colossians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 and 2 Timothy, and Titus, are fiction. The other side says these are real letters. And because you come to those books with a different mindset, you're going to either look for things to say, hey, this sounds like Paul, or on the other side you're going to say, oh, we got to find things that make them look different. Because of the mindset you bring to the scriptures, you're going to interpret it a particular way. And so the critical scholars will take these 6 letters of Paul and just throw them out. If they're doing a commentary on 1 Corinthians, they won't even reference anything from the 6 because they don't believe they're authoritative. They don't think they're authentic.
Read Edith Lenneman. She went through the Gospels word for word, the 4 Gospels. I'm convinced people don't read Edith Lenneman. Let me tell you a side story. Edith Lenneman, as some of you may know, maybe most of you know, is a converted Bolbanian. She was a student of Bolbanian and Debelius, the 2 top scholars in this area. And she had some students who witnessed to her, and she got saved. She just plain got saved. And she put a note up on her door saying, I was saved, and I've trashed all my books, and I want you to trash them all, and I'm going to the mission field. That basically summarizes what she said. That just blew their minds. Absolutely blew their minds. So she comes over to the ETS, the Evangelical Theological Society, and the ETS members are told that this great student of Debelius and Boltmont is here, etc. A friend of mine was standing there when she was being introduced to some of the American scholars, and one of the scholars said to him, "Oh, Dr. Linneman, I so loved your book on parables." And she said, "It's trash! Throw it out." She wrote the book before she was saved. It's built on the higher critical. It just absolutely, the guy didn't know what to say after.
What was the woman's name?
She stayed in our home. That's why, what a godly woman she is. I said to her, "Do you know that we kill 3,000 babies a day in the United States by abortion? And we've killed, I forget at that time how many it was, but probably about 40 million at that time." And as I was telling her this, tears ran down her cheeks. And she says, "This made in the image of God." Just touched her to tears. And every once in a while you'd hear her, she'd be in the bedroom praying where she should go next. You know, she just was here on a plane ticket, she could go anywhere, and she was just, where does God want me to go next? What a godly lady. Please read her book. She believes in the Gospels are 4 independent eyewitness accounts. Gospels, she shows by comparison, and she goes through literally every Greek word in the Gospels, proving this. Says there's nothing in the Gospels that hinders you believing that these were eyewitness accounts, independently written, not depending on anybody else, not Q, not X, Y, or Z. There's nothing that demands that. I think the longest passage is something like the size of the 23rd Psalm. It's easily memorizable in a culture like that where people memorize things a lot more anyway. And she makes a very plausible case.
What was her name again? What was her name again?
Edda Linneman. L-I-N-S. It's on here if you give me your email. It's names
Two recent books that I've been reading. One is Craig Blomberg, Denver Seminary, something like Can We Still Believe the Bible is Reliable, something like that. And, you know, there you see how far this stuff has gone. But then the other book I decided to reread after decades, Battle for the Bible by Harold Lenzel. And when you compare the two, these guys are coming from like worlds apart. You know, one guy's encouraging, you know, Blomberg even comes so far to say that those who reject the Pauline authorship of those 6 letters, although he still accepts the Pauline authorship, you can be a good solid evangelical and deny the Pauline authorship of those. You can deny the historicity of Adam and Eve and Jonah, and the list goes on and on. So it's not just what he gives away a lot, but then also what he's okay with others giving away. So you get 50 of these guys in the same room, each one might deny 2 or 3 miracles. You put them all together, eventually, you know, we're going to have every miracle denied except the virgin birth and then the resurrection. And history tells us eventually that'll go, if if not with them, then with their disciples.
Lowest common denominator.
I don't know, that reminds me of another story. I got background stories. I knew all these people, and I've been around for 85 years, and 61 years is, I saw all this stuff happen right before my eyes, so I know a lot of the people. Carol Zell contacted me once and offered me the position of being editor of Christianity Today after he left the Post. And I don't like editing, so I said no. I may have made a mistake. Christianity Today has gone down, down, down since Lindsell left. After Carl Henry and Lindsell, it's just a bunch of journalists who don't know theology at all, who are writing stuff. It's just sad. Sad. My last letter to Christianity Today, the punchline of it said, if you don't start getting more theologically sophisticated, you're going to be called Christianity Yesterday. It didn't make them real happy. And I hadn't been invited to write any articles since, but exactly how I felt.
So with the controversy surrounding Lycona and his views, why do you think someone like, for example, C.S. Lewis, who denied or didn't believe in inerrancy, has had such widespread influence?
Why does who say that?
Why does C.S. Lewis, with the appeal that he has, despite the fact that he clearly did not believe in inerrancy?
Well, nobody said you can't have influence if you don't believe in inerrancy. I mean, there are people who, James Orr didn't believe in it. The difference between the European model and the American model is the difference between Warfield and James Orr. James Orr, who was the editor of the encyclopedia that was used by evangelicals and others, it was orthodox on many, many things, but not on inerrancy. He had influence to the degree to which the truth he held has influence if proclaimed. So that's no surprise that people would have influence. C.S. Lewis is even more of a surprise because C.S. Lewis not only didn't believe in inerrancy, but at least C.S. Lewis didn't go around saying, I accept the ICBI statement on inerrancy. He didn't pretend to believe in inerrancy. But for people, the presumption of Lycona and Company absolutely boggles my mind. I was a framer of all these statements. There are only 3 living framers. I was one, R.C. Sproul, and J.I. Packer, and myself. We were the framers of these statements. And Lycona says, well, you don't understand what they meant. So I'm going to Jefferson, Adams, and Madison and say, you don't understand what the First Amendment means. I'm smarter. I study genre criticism. I can tell you what they meant. I mean, it's incredible that, and Sproul and Packer and myself have all written letters and are in print with the letters saying that Lycona's view in particular is incompatible with the ICBI statements.
Yeah.
With all the living framers of the statements say your view is incompatible, I think you ought to take that seriously.
Yes, there is a tendency among some to want to separate historical accuracy from their understanding of historical reliability. And how would you address that linkage between historical accuracy and reliability?
I said the burden of proof rests on them. What in the world do you mean? How can it be historically accurate and not reliable?
Well, what they'll counter with is the narratives themselves, the pericopes, the narratives, did historically happen, but the chronology has been rearranged.
It's not very historically accurate if it's been rearranged. If parts of it are, part of it is false, part of it didn't happen, and part of it is totally contrary to historical fact, I think the burden of the proof rests upon the person who's saying that. Not upon me to defend it, it rests upon them to defend their view. I don't see how they could take, let's just start with Luke 1 through 4. If you do an exegesis of Luke 1 through 4, it says this is an orderly account. This was based on eyewitness testimony. And this can help you to be certain of the things that you believe. I don't see how you could say, and even Burridge, the quote I gave from him, said you should take Luke seriously. If you take that seriously, you should believe in the historical accuracy of Luke. If you add to that books like Hemmer's book, and 80 details, including which way the wind blows and the proconsular's nickname and so forth and so on. Luke didn't make a single mistake. So you have external support. You have actual claim for that. I think you have a good basis for believing in the historical accuracy of Luke. Now, since Matthew and Mark say basically the same thing, that's why they're called synoptic gospels, I think that really a basis for believing in the historical accuracy of the synoptics. We can talk about John later, but you got real strong evidence. I think you could build a good case for the historicity, just starting there with Luke, and then looking at the external evidence, starting with Ramsey's work on St. Paul the Traveler, working all the way up to Colin Hemmer. You have a good basis for believing that this is an accurate book. And then when you have things like Hemmer who verifies literal historical events and sayings and names of people from that time period, that just adds frosting on the cake.
Yeah, Donald Guthrie, 60 years or 50 years ago, wrote the same thing about the critics of Paul. He said, "You will not find any evidence supporting their assumptions." And the same thing goes for those who say, "Oh, they rearranged it." What is the evidence that proves they rearranged items? You have the documents themselves. If you can harmonize them, then where is the external evidence that proves they rearranged anything?
But it is two different issues to say that the chronologies have been rearranged as opposed to saying or claiming that legend and all has been mixed into the story.
Well,
that's two different issues.
But it's the same cloth. It's the idea that somebody has imaginatively changed things for their account.
Purposes.
And the point is, whether it's, the fact that they were there or the order, it's the same thing. It's saying somebody in their mind decided to change something. And where is the evidence?
Well, but in one case it actually happened, and in the other it's not. It didn't. So there is a distinction in that regard. Yeah.
It gets down to belief in the definition of truth. And the ICBI statements define truth, that which corresponds to reality, the correspondence view of truth, is stated clearly in the ICBI documents, claims of itself that it's using the correspondence theory of truth. You look at it, it is using it. If you're making statements that don't correspond to reality, then you're going contrary to what you say is your correspondence view of truth. If you talk to Lakota, he'll say, Well, I believe in the correspondence view of truth generally. Generally. Well, when do you not believe in the correspondence view of truth? Well, when I get to some problem. You can't do that. You can't deny the correspondence view of truth without using the correspondence view of truth. Because you have to use the belief that your statement corresponds to reality as a basis for denying that statements can correspond to reality. So you can't do that. So they play footloose and fancy free with the correspondence view of truth and fall back time after time on the intentionalist or functional view of truth. Truth is what the author intended. Well, truth is not what the author intended. So that every sincere statement ever made is true, even all of them that were false. Well, that's ridiculous. Of course, I have to apologize for using logic. All right, thank you for coming, and if you want a copy of the presentation, just give me your email.
Dr. Geisler, have you ever known anybody who started on this process that he's on, and these others that have come back?
Just come back.
Yeah.
Oh, good question.
Well, there are some of them, yeah.
Are there?
Yeah. Not many.
Because I've never known anyone that started down that road.
Yeah.
They stop at different places.
Yeah.
But I've never known one to come completely back.
Well, I mean, there are people who were totally liberal.
Yeah.
Came back, you know.
So, but I mean people who had been on the right side, who drifted into something like this, like inerrancy of purpose or something like that. And I don't know any of them that have ever come back.
Like Bart Ehrman.
Yeah.
I got to tell you a story about Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman was at the street at University of North Carolina, and one of the students there who was at the Ehrman meeting related a story to me. A student asked Ehrman, "Do you miss your relationship with Jesus?" Because he claims he went to Moody Bible Institute at college and claims to have been a Christian. And Ehrman thought for a moment. He said, "Not really. I miss my relationship with some Christians and so forth, but I don't miss my relationship with Jesus." Now, my dear wife and I have been married for 61 years. And if she died and you came to me and said, "Do you miss your relationship to your wife?" And I said, "Well, not really. I miss the family reunions." We got together. You know why he doesn't miss his relationship? He never had one.
Yeah.
Never had one.
That's the only answer to that question is they never had one.
Thank you, that was excellent.
Teaches at mostly an evangelical school.
I'll just send you an email.
Only teach Christianity. In fact, Harold Lindsell talks about that. There were some guys when they denied it.